Good morning, everybody. Yet another, I was going to say Wednesday webinar. In fact, it is a Tuesday today. I've got my calendar right. Again, great to have you guys with us. We continue with our series of talks this month on kind of retrofit and circular economy. And delighted this week to have Darren Bray, who we've talked to before and heavily involved and hugely passionate about the reuse and retrofit of buildings. Before we get into that and we get Darren talking about his particular topic this week, we are just going to go through a bit of admin. Do keep your mics on mute. As usual, do use the chat box as well. We'll answer questions at the end rather than kind of interrupting and freestyling the questions as we go through. And as always, the webinar is being recorded. We'll actually be posting this on MESHWORK. First and foremost, it may well find its way eventually onto YouTube, but we'll benefit those members that are on MESHWORK first with the recording, which should go up later on today. So if you have to leave halfway through, or you want somebody else to look at it, or you want to have a look at it in the middle of the night, then you can watch that recording. And as always, MESHWORK continues to be a free platform. Do tell your friends and colleagues. We've punched well past the 600 mark. We're trying to get to over 1,000 members before Christmas, so all referrals welcome. We've got a huge amount of content and some great speakers lined up, and the more people that are on this platform, the more we'll do with it. So do share the love, as they say. And then finally, just a bit about Mesh Energy. If you haven't been on these webinars before, Mesh Energy is a practice based on towards the south of the UK, around the kind of Guildford Farnham area. We are an independent and holistic energy consultancy, and first and foremost, really, we are working with architects primarily, but a lot of other people in the built environment, just to make their low energy projects more successful. Given the fact that we are doing stuff on MESHWORK now, education is a huge part of what we're doing. So we're keen to share what we know for the wider benefit of others. So that's me done for the moment. As I was saying, Darren Bray, I'm delighted to have Darren on with us for the rest of the hour. Darren's going to be talking through a few projects that he's been involved with. And then after that, we're going to have Jen, who's a Mesh colleague of mine, talking about our involvement in one of the church projects that Darren's going to cover off. And then hopefully we'll have kind of 10-15 minutes at the end to cover off for questions, as we normally do. So as they do, leave your comments in the chat, and Darren, I will hand it over to you to share your knowledge.
Thanks very much, Doug. Can everybody hear me? Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah, all good, Darren, all good.
Excellent, thank you very much. Thanks, Doug, thanks, Jenny, thanks, Catherine. Good morning, everybody. We've got a long-standing relationship with Doug and the team at Mesh. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do, what we have done over the last 3 years since we launched the practice, and 2 out of the 3 projects I'm going to talk in detail, Mesh have been involved in and been massive support to us and ongoing. I launched Studio B80 almost 3 years ago, and kind of moved away from the sort of private practice I was in, and decided it was time to have a go at sort of running my own practice, but doing something slightly different. So one of the things that I've always been incredibly passionate about, even since the age of 16, when I started my journey in the profession, is the practice of social value in architecture. And I have some colleagues that I teach with at the University of Reading who've written quite substantially about this. So as a practice, based on adding social value, we can often be immersed in a range of typologies. We're actively involved in community participation projects, and where there are self-builds, cooperatives, homeless charities, and public sector bodies. Our business is in creating social value around people's well-being, as well as delight within our architectural response. And so, particularly over the last 18 months, we've sort of grown our list of collaborators, people like Neil, who's an urban designer, and Amanda Moore, who's an architect and an artist, have been working quite heavily with us. But within that world, there are a whole bunch of people that I have collaborated with in academia. So Roger Tyrrell, I've known 30 odd years, who was my first employer, but then became my professor, and now is as an academic at Portsmouth who works with us. Tazir was one of my students at Portsmouth who now works with me 5 days a week. And Chloe and Amber were two of my first years last year and the year before. So we're quite interested in building teams around projects rather than formulating a sort of traditional model. And so I mentioned, social value to us is hugely important. So we undertake quite a lot of community engagement with our projects, whether that's working with churches or high streets. It's really, really important for us to make sure that we have the permission from clients to move forward with projects so that they feel that they're kind of embedded and engaged in projects. So we have some core studio values, which is the idea of reflecting, engaging, reimagining, testing, and teaching. And these are things that, when we're talking to clients or we're putting together bids, particularly with local authorities, we talk about these things. These are the things that for us have to align with a client. It's not just about us winning a project because, we need a project to kind of deliver the business. It's about aligning with very clear objectives as to what we want to do. Having spent, sort of 20 odd years delivering, really beautiful private houses and the like, it was time for me to do something slightly different within society. And so a couple of years ago, we were invited to write the foreword to Mesh and Doug's fantastic little pocketbook, Right First Time. And this struck a real chord with us because we were just starting to get interested in what activism is in the built environment. And it's really interesting in that activism now plays a key role within the University of Reading School of Architecture. All the briefs that are written this year, even within first year, we're starting to talk to students about activism. What is it, as professionals that we have to be delivering to make sure that we're aligning ourselves with climate change, and actually activism is really important. I think I may call myself an architect running an architectural practice, but it's really important that we are first and foremost every project that inquiry that we get, we need to look at that as how that is going to be a positive influence within the built environment. And I think when you look at lots of the kind of talk that's going on within the built environment and the wider world, dear old Greta, as she says that there's a lot of blah blah blah. So actually, it's really important that we are actually standing up to what we say are our kind of key values. And for us, it's about trying to work with existing conditions more than anything else. And there are lots of people out there doing incredible bits of activism, depending on what your viewpoint is and what you believe. But actually, lots of these bits of activism have brought the conversation to the fore. And I think as building professionals, we need to be having these conversations every day of the week with our clients. So reuse, reimagining, retrofit of existing buildings and public spaces is really important to us, and actually even this morning, if you read some of the things that are coming out around demolition and carbon embodied in buildings, for us, we are interested in conditions that involve non-demolition or their brownfield sites. And I think at the moment we've probably only got 2 projects that are new builds, but they're actually on brownfield sites. For us, we're really interested in existing conditions where it's reuse and reimagining. And for us, that's really exciting. And it's really exciting for clients as well to kind of reimagine an existing building, whether it's listed, whether it's not listed. And social architecture, well, as I said, my colleague Flora Samuel wrote a fantastic book called Why Architects Matter. Why Architects Matter examines the key role of research-led ethical architects in promoting well-being, sustainability and innovation. Social architects as an ideal work for the good of people and the planet. And actually, that's something that we believe really passionately about. This requires a great degree of humility and self-effacement that is not generally associated with architects. But I think, you know, that's changing, and there are many of us out there now that, you know, not just architects but other building professionals that are looking at how we, you know, sort of really deal with some of these conditions, whether it's the high street, whether it's homelessness. So I'm going to talk about existing conditions in the built environment, and actually in the last 12 months we've been doing some interesting stuff in and around Southampton and other towns like Eastleigh and Gosport. We were invited by our long-standing client Go Southampton, who run the business improvement district, to come and help them post COVID, where the local authority had put in place some temporary road closures in Bedford Place and Carlton Place here in Southampton. So we were asked to go and engage with all hospitality. Now, some people loved the idea of closing roads, other people hated it. Unfortunately, you know, we attended a lot of meetings where we had to have extremely thick skin, where we were called all sorts of names under the sun, because some people believe that you can't do anything unless you're in a car and the roads are open. So what we had to do was change the conversation. And we changed the conversation by looking at the 15-minute city. Now, if you see what the Lady Mayor of Paris is doing at the moment, it's being rolled out as a key principle. And as soon as we started to talk about the key principles of the 15-minute city, that started to remove some of the emotiveness around closing roads and allowing people to exist in the street, where people weren't able to kind of go and have meals and go out for a drink in enclosed spaces. So we just started to talk about the principles of the 15-minute city or the 20-minute neighbourhood. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those principles, but effectively, if you're in a sort of an urban condition or a town condition, the key principles are that you're able to kind of undertake most of your daily choices, whether it's going to the dentist, whether it's going to get your hair cut, whether it's going to work or taking your kids to school. So once we started to talk about these principles, people started to come on board. So once we kind of got people on board, we then produced a whole series of very provocative images where we looked at how we could sort of reimagine, activate the high street through street art, through lighting, you know, just engaging with local artists. So we worked with a whole series of artists in terms of reimagining Bedford Place and Carlton Place. And it's been a massive success. If you talk to lots of the hospitality businesses in this area of Southampton, it's enabled them to survive and thrive at the same time. This is the kind of key crew here. This is Amanda, who we collaborated with. Amanda designed all the artwork for the road. This is Giles, who's the director of the bid. And then some of these guys, Phil here runs Pikerumba, and some of the other hospitality guys all kind of signed up to, you know, what we were about and what we were doing. And I think, you know, it's proved that actually, you know, we can exist within existing conditions, and high streets and places, you know, have a real role to play. And now as Southampton moves towards its bid for City of Culture 2025, there's a real kind of buzz in the air in Southampton where there's not just us doing things, there's lots of other amazing artists and architects working within the city. And this project has enabled us to kind of move on and go and work with other towns on the south coast. So again, you know, we're working around public space. We were asked to look at Guildhall Square again for sort of temporary activation. And again, this is a little bit of us sort of as activists, where we came up with an idea of an urban rug. And then we sort of worked with Amanda to kind of come up with this idea of an urban rug as a temporary activation for families and children within the city. Amanda's you know, an incredibly talented artist, where she kind of took the motif of the Guildhall, and then she designed this wonderful kind of design of this kind of weaving idea of this rug. And then Sai, who works with us, created these fantastic illustrations where we were looking to create our little urban rug with a little sandpit and planters and little beach huts, just as a very sort of quick 6-week activation in the centre of Southampton. And it was really quite interesting how people interacted with this. We actually designed and actually installed this artwork. I recruited some of my wonderful students from University of Reading, where we actually put the artwork down on the 2 hottest days of the year. I mean, I thought it was actually going to kill us. And As you can imagine, trying to install artwork on granite that's 30 degrees is quite something. But we learnt a great deal from doing it and watched how people interacted with this space. And we're actually designing a kit of parts now, so this will actually sort of reappear in the spring throughout Southampton, just as an idea of kind of reactivating spaces. I think it's really important that every town and city has spaces throughout, and there are real opportunities for those of us that are architects and artists to kind of get involved in these things. So our kind of first major project, which we worked on with Mesh, is a bookshop in Portswood in Southampton, and a wonderful client, October Books, bought this former NatWest Bank, where we helped them to negotiate a good price on this building. And it's a perfect example of how to kind of reimagining an existing structure. So October Books has existed in Southampton for nearly 40 years. Owen Hathley, who's a well-known architectural writer, actually worked in this bookshop, and his little article that he wrote in The Guardian some years ago about his experience. October Books is known as a kind of radical bookshop. And Claire, who runs October Books, had this wonderful idea that they would go out to the community and they would fundraise through crowdfunding and selling loan stock to buy this building. We were asked to come on board and to kind of reimagine this building. Claire brought on board another client, the Society St James, or a local homeless charity, to take the 2 top floors of this building, providing housing for vulnerable people that may have come from all sorts of difficult backgrounds, maybe suffering from mental health or addiction, or may have even spent time in prison. And for us, these were sort of values that were aligning with us, and we were really quite keen to see what we could do with this building. So as I said, we do lots of community engagement. It's spending time with the community, understanding, what it is that they want from this building, and it's for them to drive that. It's not for us to come with predefined ideas. So community, what is it? A group of people living in the same place or having particular characteristics in common, a group of people living together, practicing common ownership, a particular area of place considered together its inhabitants, the people of a district, country considered collectively, especially in the context of social values and responsibilities. So we drew some inspiration from Shakespeare & Co. in Paris, where this bookshop has existed for 60 or 70 years, where actually the bookshop is open for long hours, and people come in off the street. Homeless people actually almost sleep within the books. So we did a lot of kind of looking for inspiration. We spent a day in London with a client looking at Liberia, which is a wonderful bookshop. And then we had to kind of deal with what NatWest had kind of left behind, which was literally everything, all the mechanical, electrical, and we then had to kind of, it was a case of kind of forensically stripping the building back to see what we had to be able to deal with, delivering a bookshop and the housing above. And of course, that can take a great deal of time, but it can also enable you to find things that actually will add to the quality and the joy of the space. So our kind of key move was kind of thinking about how we would deliver a bookshop. Our big major move, we had a limited budget, was to create this huge wall of books that children could actually sit and inhabit. And then we had this idea that there would be a kind of street within the ground floor of the building, which would have a community space at the back. So we kind of looked at how we might reimagine this space with the bookshop at the front, keeping the cast in situ concrete vault in the centre of the building with a community space to the rear. And in terms of what we did to the building, it was kind of light touch. It had a sort of neoclassical stone facade where we kind of cleaned it up and added some new windows where we cut out some of the stonework to get natural daylight deep into the space. But effectively, it was about kind of new fascia, a new way for October Books to exist. Their existing place that they rented was costing them a great deal of amount further up the high street on Portswood High Street. And then we started with Darcy Construction, basically stripping out everything. So you can see Rob, our site manager. This is the old cash machine vault, which we'd literally dug out the floor and reused and repurposed, which you'll see in some of the photographs. but it took us weeks, if not months, to kind of strip out all the old M&E before we could kind of really see what we were dealing with. It had all the classic sort of office partitions that we've ripped out. Here's my daughter sat in the wall of books. So this was our kind of major thing, because we had a limited budget. It was about being very careful where we put the budget. So we designed this kind of birch ply wall where all the books would sit. And interestingly, when all the books had to be moved from the old bookshop to the new bookshop, it's along Portswood High Street, and Claire, the client, had this idea that on a Sunday morning there'd be this human chain to move all the books. Somebody filmed this happening on a Sunday morning, posted it online, and on the Monday it appeared in the Daily Echo. By Wednesday it was in BBC News, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. So it just showed the kind of the activism of the people that had not only given the money, but they were involved in, kind of moving, hundreds, if not thousands, of books from one space to another. And here's the team that delivered that wonderful project. The local rebel gardeners turned up overnight to plant outside. So there you can see the old vault that we reused, and then the cash machine that was then designed into the desk. Our wall of books. And you'll see just up here, we kind of left the cast in situ concrete ceiling, which enabled us to do less in terms of acoustic attenuation between ground and first floor. And with all these projects, I'm a great believer in kind of reflecting on these things. I think this is a wonderful quote from Ai Weiwei. If any of you've seen the film Human Flow or read the book Humanity, he's somebody who strikes a real chord with us. So you begin to understand that we all have the same basic needs, that our sense of humanity and integrity, our desire for warmth and safety, to be well treated and respected, are the same. And I think that applies, even more now than it did when we did this project. So we're involved in a very small domestic listed house in Meonstoke High Street, which we've been working on for a couple of years now. Highly conserved area of the South Downs. But again, this kind of aligned with our kind of values about how to reuse and reimagine. The family's growing, and they needed space to extend this house without damaging the kind of current conditions. So we worked really quite hard. As you can see, it sits deep in the heart of the high street, but we worked very closely with the local conservation officer, putting together a whole series of sketches and ideas, different conditions that we could kind of put in front of the conservation officer, just to test in kind of pre-act terms. And it was quite interesting once we began to kind of sketch out, what we might do by kind of, not really touching the existing house, but actually moving towards the rear garden, and just kind of showing this idea that we might design a little pavilion in between the kind of existing condition and the new condition in the rear garden. So we're just about to start on site with this project. Here's the existing house. We've got our little dining room pavilion, which is the kind of the stitch between old and new. And the conservation officer actually encouraged us to be more contemporary as we moved kind of further east into the garden. So we had a really good planning run on this. There was very little challenges. So we've designed this kind of brick contemporary extension that runs into the garden and sort of leaves the existing condition of the existing listed house. So we were literally about 3 or 4 weeks starting on site with this. The model that we had made for planning. So again, there's the existing house, there's the little sort of zinc pavilion, and then we've got our little brick extension that runs into the garden, and then it's got this really amazing flint wall that runs to the rear of the property. And the sort of last project I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail is a project we've been working on for 2 years now. It's a church in Southsea, St Margaret's. If any of you know Southsea, it sits sort of at the end of Albert Road, Highland Road. This is the cemetery here, so actually not far from the seafront. But it's got this amazing community around it. And the Archdeacon actually condemned this building about 5 years ago because the roof was unsafe, and it wasn't actually being used, but a local family came on board to basically run it. So they took it off the hands of Portsmouth Diocese, and Portsmouth Diocese basically said, well, providing you can make it safe, we'll put a funding application in to see whether we can get funding to deal with the lack of heating and the current condition of the church. We were brought on board to do a feasibility study, which was to kind of look at reimagining what it is church is for the 21st century. They were kind of existing in the community centre next door, so they weren't actually using the church. So once it was made safe and watertight, we encouraged the community to go back into the church before we did anything. I think they thought as architects we were just going to sort of rock up and come with a sort of fully formulated plan, but that's not the way that we work. We were interested in taking inspiration from churches in the past. If you look at Le Corbusier's Ronchamp Church from the sort of 50s, which was all about light, and we were really interested in that kind of idea as St Margaret's as a community being a vessel of light, and how we could actually change the perception of the church within the community, and how the threshold was really important to bring people back into the church. So here it is. This is the existing condition. As I say, it had amazing amounts of people who were really keen to be involved. It's a Victorian church behind this main entrance, but then this is a sort of 1950s extension, which was added at a later date. And one of the first things we did, we said we would run a community engagement afternoon. So we did that sort of an hour or two before their Sunday service. This is myself and Roger kind of running that community engagement. And this is Stephen Morgan, the local Labour MP, who came along, and there were lots of other members of the community that came and got involved. And we just kind of ran it as a sort of a fun activity. But, you know, there was quite a lot of emotion and seriousness in what we were doing. We were asking people to tell us what should this building, what should it be in terms of the community? And there were lots of kind of wonderful ideas. This is Fran, who's effectively the kind of lead as far as we're concerned in terms of the client. Fran is currently training to be ordained, and he's one of the most amazing clients I've ever worked with. He's just got incredible vision and passion, and kind of, you know, we all have to sort of keep up with Fran in terms of his vision. So we ran that community event, and this is some of the sort of data that came out of that, and it was quite clear that church for this community had to be something that happened on a daily basis. Obviously, their faith was hugely important, their Sunday services were hugely important, but the building had to work for the community on a daily basis. And so one of the first things that happened was that the church moved back into this building, and they had this idea of running a cafe, a shop, and a food bank. And they did that as a temporary sort of meanwhile solution. That was something that we encouraged them to do. And it kind of started to kind of develop almost like a business plan for the community and the church. And it actually had, you know, there was a sort of a revenue stream coming in. So once we kind of encouraged them back in, and we'd actually gone to some of the Sunday services in the building and we'd observed, we started to kind of look and sketch. And for us, it was all about kind of breaking down the barriers of the threshold and how you might be able to see deep into this building and encourage people to come in. And we sort of sketched and drew and sort of met on a regular basis. And for us, it was about not just the people, but the light that came into this building, because it's in a way, it's almost cathedral-like, this space. But it was suffering from a lack of heating. It was suffering from you know, other conditions that we needed to just kind of deal with. So we came up with some key proposals. The first proposal was to design a new entrance cafe to the building, and we've currently got a plan application in at the moment, which is running. But it was also about having this kind of street that ran around this kind of community market where things might happen in the kind of arches, and that's developed over time. So, you know, we've been kind of looking at how, you know, light comes into this building, and how you can kind of look deep into this building now that we've kind of changed the entrance. So one of the first things we did in terms of sort of meanwhile was that the client was quite keen to do one space really quickly, and that was a sort of Sunday school space that right at the rear of the church. So they said, would we look at designing just a very simple insertion, which was a door and a screen? And for us, that was really quite exciting because it meant that we could actually test some ideas at kind of one-to-one. So we started sketching and drawing, you know, this idea of what a simple door and screen might be to kind of insert into this building, and how the light might come into this building and this space. And I've never seen so many people get so excited about a door and screen, and actually it taught us a great deal, because actually we proposed that this door and a screen would all be about, you know, kind of understanding the difference between the two spaces, how light would transmit between these two spaces, but also the kind of permeability, the idea that this door most of the time would be kind of slid open. It's just a very simple birch ply insertion, but actually it sort of led on to everything else that we've done in this space. So there are lots of amazing people that are involved in this building day to day, running the food bank. If any of you know Southsea, you'll know that Southsea has a really strong street art scene, and FARC is just one of those, with this wonderful piece of artwork on the front of the hoarding on the building. So the next move was to get underfloor heating and renewable energy into this building, and MESH were hugely important in that, in terms of doing a detailed feasibility study. And so our key move was to put new underfloor heating in through air source heat pumps. The existing space had this rather wonderful but tired parquet flooring, which we proposed to take up and sell, which we did. So it was all packed up and was sold for quite a large sum of money that went back into the budget. And then over the top of that underfloor heating, we proposed to put a polished concrete floor in. So we spent a day in London with the client where we went and looked at lots of polished concrete. Here's Fran, who is there pondering his polished concrete. I've never seen anybody get so excited about polished concrete and stainless steel grills that were going to go in as part of the heating system. So this was the space a couple of weeks after the polished concrete was installed and the air source heat pumps were installed. So you can see that space in the wings and the arches leads onto that little Sunday school room space where we did the door and the screen. So these are sort of, you know, incremental acts as and when funds and energy is available. We designed this birch ply cafe on wheels, which will go into the extension once we build the extension. These images were taken a couple of weeks ago, where the church ran a local exhibition for local artists. You'll also see in the background that we've installed a children's play centre, which is really, really interesting, because actually there are a whole group of the community now that are embedded and being involved in the church from a much younger generation, families that have now got children, and Fran was massively influential in pushing that forward. There's a piece of FARC's artwork there. You'll see the play centre above. I love these lights that have been in the building ever since we actually started the project. So we're just literally about to do the final piece, which is a new entrance door on the front of this church and ramp. And then that will sort of conclude our phase one, really. So I'm now going to just flick through a few images of the extension that we've designed. So this is currently in for planning. We've also put new toilets into the space. The previous toilets, you literally had to walk all the way through the church to the back of the church, and there was one tiny little toilet and sink here. So we've now provided 4 new toilets and disabled and changing. So we've got a much more kind of welcoming entrance, and our new door that we've designed is much more kind of permeable and allows people to be much more welcomed, and it's much more transparent. And so, you know, this is a very sort of moving, active project for us, and you know, we're really excited that, you know, we'll be involved in this project for a number of years. So the idea of the extension is that it provides a new space, cafe space at the front with a kind of north facing monopitch roof light, but it then connects back to the village hall. This is the village hall, the church hall here. Just a few of the images of the model that we have made for the extension. And I'm just going to end on this quote, really. In this time of uncertainty, we need more tolerance, compassion, and trust for each other, since we all are one. Otherwise, humanity will face even bigger crisis. I'm just going to end there, if that's all right.
Thanks, Darren. I know Jen was going to give us a bit on our as in Mesh, his contribution to the church project. But just before Jen dives in there, fantastic to see that floor done. I haven't seen those photos, and great to see people on that new polished concrete floor and not wearing too many clothes, which is great. So Jen, over to you if you just want to do a bit on our involvement there, and then we'll open up for questions.
Yeah, sure. I suppose, Darren, are you able to pop up a picture of the church to look at, some of those wonderful pictures while I'm talking through? So yeah, Mesh first got involved sort of mid to late 2019, and at that point the church had just been saved from demolition, and the plans to redevelop were well underway, but the gas supply had been disconnected, as had the existing gas boiler. And so in the short term, we needed a way to keep the occupants warm while the wider works were planned, and we looked into options for doing that. We landed on some temporary infrared heaters, the benefit of those being that we could shift them around as the different groups were using the church, whether that be the coffee shop or the children's group or the main service. And then to establish a long-term heating solution, we carried out a feasibility study. Now, in a feasibility study, we're weighing up not just the technical practicalities of the solution, e.g., can enough heat be provided by whatever heating system we're using? And that's a big challenge, particularly for retrofits, because heat pumps operate most efficiently at much lower flow temperatures than gas boilers and oil boilers. We also looked at part of that feasibility study, you know, the budget that was available, what subsidies could be applied for, and what the funding costs were likely to be. And we carried out a room-by-room heat loss assessment, which allowed us to advise on the size of the heating plant and the heat emitters, and all of that data fed into our economic analysis of various options. And the church were really keen to have this flexible space where the community groups could use the space for whatever they wanted. You know, look at these pictures here, so you know, there's so much flexibility there. And the underfloor heating really lent itself to that, as also because of the high ceilings, the underfloor heating is a really good solution for that. At the time, the non-domestic renewable heat incentive was available, and was a really beneficial scheme for air source heat pump and ground source heat pump systems. And our final recommendation was an underfloor heating system fed by air source heat pump gas bivalent system. Now, a bivalent system is sometimes called a hybrid system. Typically, it's where a fossil fuel boiler supports a heat pump. And this is a good solution for retrofit projects, particularly where improving the original building fabric isn't an option. So I think great at listed buildings and churches. So on the coldest days of the year, the boiler kicks in to ensure that enough heat is delivered to the rooms that need it. And I think I saw a question about the grills in the floor. I think the grills in the floor are where the radiators for the gas boilers are in that main room. So they're there to just give that extra bit of heat on the coldest of days. So fast forward a year or so, and the church had fundraised for the development, found an installer, and work was underway. And Mesh's next involvement was to help with that subsidy application, that non-domestic RHI application. That process was, I should say, quite in depth and a bit of a warren to navigate. We liaised with the installer and the designer to make sure that all of the required documentation was delivered ahead of the deadline on the 31st of March. And that ended up being quite tight because there was all of the problems we experienced last year, and there were delays to the air source heat pump delivery. So they were actually commissioned on the 22nd of March, but we all managed to pull together and get it all done in time. And as you can imagine, there was quite a rush of last minute applications to that scheme. So we're still waiting for confirmation it was accredited, but we've had positive noises from them. So yeah, bated breath, but it was a really rewarding project to be a part of.
Great. What I was going to say is, based on what Darren was saying there, actually was, you know, Fran, I know Fran from my early involvement in the project, and it does make such a massive difference having, you know, proper engaged stakeholders on these projects. You know, something as massive, particularly as that church project is, you know, is flipping complicated. Nothing is ever straightforward, particularly when you've got, you know, so many people with an opinion, but having somebody really at the head of the project which is supportive is great. And I say that, you know, the church is really an exemplar from a technical point of view, as well as far as I can tell, a stakeholder point of view, and just shows what you can have done. Can you imagine if that church was just left to rot? You know, how much worse off the community would have been. You know, with a lot of blood, sweat and tears and support, an incredible, you know, hub of the local community. And actually, from a technical point of view, I wish, you know, I understand church heritage, but underfloor heating in churches is a wonderful thing. They are technically, it is massively difficult to heat such a huge volume of air, and hugely wasteful, given that they're only often occupied for the first few meters off the floor. So great to see, you know, modern meets old on that particular project. So I know we've got a few questions which hopefully Darren can pitch in, or Jen potentially. Natasha asked about the grills, and Jen mentioned about that on the radiators. So we've got underfloor heating on the bulk of it, and then rads for the gas heating in the winter. Natasha again has asked I think you mean, Natasha, you've asked what brand of bivalent system did you use? I'm assuming you mean what brand of heat pumps. Jen, do you know what brand of heat pump?
Yeah, they were Mitsubishi's. Okay. Commercial size Mitsubishi's.
Yeah.
I don't know what brand the gas boiler was.
No, was it 2 or 3 heat pumps? Was there at least 2, wasn't it?
Two air source heat pumps, yeah.
Yeah. And I know that particular project in further phases is looking at solar PV and other renewables as well. But yeah, I mean,
oh, sorry. I was just
go on, Natasha.
Okay. So you basically have a heat pump and then a boiler that sits alongside it, and they are just linked, are they, through some sort of
just like a logic control. So if the air source heat pump, if it senses that it's not delivering enough heat to the room, it sends a signal to the gas boiler. It says, I'm not, you know, the temperatures, I'm not hitting the set points, and then the gas boiler will kick in.
I see. So actually you can use any type of heat pump and any type of gas boiler, and you just need that
any
connection.
boiler. Any boiler, it could be an oil boiler, it could be.
Yeah, I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, essentially it's like what they call a master slave setup. So they're plumbed in parallel to the heating system, but the renewable bit does as much of the heavy lifting as possible. And when it gets to a point where it's struggling to heat the building, the sensors tell it that the kind of the higher temperature oil or gas or LPG or electric heating, whatever, kicks in and gives it that you know, kind of traditional boost. But what it means for the running costs is that you've offset a lot of the running costs with that renewable technology. So it's a great, you know, whilst it's not through and through renewable, it's a really good kind of middle ground, particularly for, you know, larger, older, poorly insulated buildings that have reached the limit of their kind of insulation. But great. Anybody got any other questions for Darren? Whilst you're punching those in, I you know, love those street street artwork there, Darren, that you were talking about in that first case study. I don't know if anybody spotted the Pac-Man in the in one of those images. I thought that was I thought that was great. And yeah, I mean, the way you went about engaging let's talk about that first case study there, Darren. The way you went about engaging those people in the local community, that was some kind of a forum meeting that was held in the village hall or some kind of communal area, and you did a bit of explaining the scheme, and then you just opened the floor to what people thought.
Yeah, I mean, it was, as I said, it was really emotive because if any of you know Bedford Place in Southampton, it's a Georgian high street, and that Georgian high street has a particular traditional sort of business on it. So lots of hairdressers, sort of art picture frame shops, a very famous shoe shop. But recently, in the last 20 years, it's got lots of hospitality, which lends itself to the students. And so we had sort of two kind of defining opinions, which were hospitality were totally on board in terms of eating outside, because it gave all of those hospitality guys an opportunity to basically double the amount of covers they were doing with the COVID restrictions. But the traditional businesses, even one of them happens to be my local hairdresser. I would go into that hairdresser's and the owner would, sort of, bend my ear about when we were going to reopen the road. And I was like, well, maybe we won't. And maybe we need, and what I had to do was have these conversations around the 15-minute city and climate change. And suddenly people were like, oh, actually, COVID isn't just about a pandemic, it's about a much bigger, wider thing, which actually links itself to climate change. And so we had to change the conversation, because we would go to meetings and people would call me all sorts of things, because we were literally involved as the reimaginers, as the designers, and myself and the client had to have really thick skin, because we'd go to these meetings every week and we would just be sort of yelled at. So the fact that we managed to achieve what we did was quite something. Now, unfortunately, part of that road has been reopened because we've had a change of politics in the city, and the current leaders have put it in their manifesto they were going to reopen the road, which is a really sad thing, because actually there was a massive amount of activism and petition, and actually Climate Extinction Rebellion in Southampton got involved. So it's really interesting. I think, these conversations that we're having about, where we need to get to are massively emotive. And but some of us, unfortunately have to sort of step up and get involved in these things. But you learn from the process. Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, what's based on all the experience that you've had? I mean, it's great when everybody rolls over and says, this is a fantastic thing to do. Why don't you get on and do it? Here's some money. That's ideal. That's ideal. But where it does get sticky and you meet a lot of resistance. But it's and I'm thinking about everybody else on the call here. If they're in a situation where they know there is something that needs to be done here, can be improved, but they're quite tentative about getting beaten up over what their idea could be. What's the best way of what's the it's great talking about the first step. What's the first step that people could take to is it holding a group meeting? What is it? Is it talking? Who should they talk to? What's
in some ways it's about this, coming back to this idea of meanwhile solutions. It's about having a go at something, because traditionally everybody talks about community engagement and what that involves, and traditionally that's been somebody putting together a series of images, hiring a hall, putting that stuff in a hall and getting feedback, and that's fine. That's one way of doing it. But actually what we found was the road was closed, so it was about us activating that street, actually having a go at doing something and seeing what people's response to it was or is.
Yeah.
And now Carlton Place is still closed, and they've just put together a working group to actually talk about possibly that becoming a permanent pedestrianised street. So it's the act of having a go at something and actually getting live feedback. And I know for some people, again, that will be really quite emotive, and I need to see images, I need to see words and surveys, but I think it's really important, like the church, the church, we've gone through this kind of meanwhile and doing things and building and doing when we've got money and funds and energy. and you test. It's about testing more than anything else, because actually you can talk about these things and you can show images about these things for forever, but actually until you test these, you know, opportunities, you know, like bike lanes, you know, if you put bike lanes in a city, people will use them, you know, and it's all right seeing people saying, oh, don't put bike lanes in a city because people will never use them. You know, it's a chicken and egg thing. And I think we're in this time now where we need to be bold. And if you look at the Lady Mayor of Paris, what she's doing now is remarkable. You know, she's literally saying we're going to remove 20 or 40,000 car parking spaces in the next 2 years in Paris. We're going to pedestrianise whole roads. And again, she's going to get all sorts of pushback. But if you go online, right, and you search Amsterdam in the 1970s, right, Amsterdam is full of cars. There are people having punch-ups in the middle of Amsterdam where they've got temporary road closures and people are moving barriers. So all of these places that we go to now, where we've got pedestrianisation and places to sit out and eat out and have a wonderful public realm experience, they weren't always like that. It's taken activism, and it's taken, you know, people being bold and having nerve to do these things. And I think, and that's the way we're teaching our students now at university. We're saying, you know, we've got to address these things. We've got to be bold. We've got to be active. And you have to accept that there will be differing opinions, but you have to listen. Yeah,
and I think, you know, it's always, you know, it's always easy for all of us to shoot down a crap verbal idea or what we perceive to be, you know, bad verbally. But if actually somebody goes to the effort of putting, you know, as I say, doing something, there's an investment of time and effort there. There will always be people that support the scheme, and they will be the people who are using that. And they quickly drown out the naysayers, because the naysayers are often those people who want a quick fix and, you know, want to grumble and want to turn up to a meeting so they can have kind of 5 minutes of fame. But when you, as I say, when you've actually done something, whether it's a kid using a sandpit, whether it's somebody eating out in front of a restaurant in the middle of what used to be a busy road, you know, that's, you know, action is speaking louder than grumbles in that particular case. So what we're saying is get outside of your comfort zone. If you see areas or buildings, or, you know, you've got an idea, don't be afraid to, you know, suggest something and stick with it. If you feel that passionate about it, I'm guessing, given your experience, you know, talk to others that have done it. You know, we're all keen to kind of share our successes and failures here. So rather than making all those mistakes that others have made and learn from them, you know, try and reach out to people who, you know, like yourself, Darren, who've done that before. Try and make it as easier and as meaningful a transition as possible, if that's something.
Absolutely. And in some cases, you know, some things won't work, but that's just as important as the things that do work, because, you know, you can test something, and if something doesn't work, you're like, okay, well, that doesn't work, and we've tested it in real life, in real time, in a live situation. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, nobody's been any more forthcoming with questions, Darren. So I'm going to leave you to the rest of your day. A huge thank you for sharing your case studies and what you've done with some of these communities. As of next week, we're going to mix it up again. We're going to do a Monday webinar next week. So check out that 10 to 11 slot on Monday. We're going to hear from PYC, actually, again, continuing with reusing of materials and circular economy. They're going to be focusing on using waste as a material in the circular economy, and particularly how they make insulation out of waste products for use in passive houses, MMC, you know, buildings, and some really interesting stuff about how we can use waste and recycling and using of materials. That's PYC on Monday next week at 10 a.m. So cheers, guys. Thanks very much yet again, Darren, and thank you, Jen, for your input there. And we will catch everybody next Monday. Take care. Thanks very much. See ya. Bye-bye.